Pandemic tour, the other pandemic, which we called this trip that. Of course, there's COVID, the ramifications from that. Fortunately, lot less cases, lot less death. Although today we did reach the really terrible milestone of 600,000 dead people, dead Americans due to COVID. But we are taking a road trip through Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, possibly elsewhere, to focus on the other pandemic, which is America. Capitalism, 11 million people being evicted at the end of this month, exploding homelessness all over major cities and rural areas, and many other stories we're going to cover. Yesterday, we interviewed a local activist who has been on the ground doing what the government should be doing, which is distributing food and other programs to those most in need here. While we were interviewing her, which happens a lot just on the ground in the flow of things, a houseless person who's been living in a park for over a year with other houseless people, he approached us and we interviewed him after, not live, and we aired that this morning. This is a construction worker who, like many, were evicted during the pandemic, had no family to go live with, no savings, and has been living in a park and under a train for over a year. We interviewed him, heartbreaking interview. Trust me, CNN's not doing it. MSNBC's not doing it. Frankly, nobody's doing it. So definitely check that out. We're going to try to go back to that park today. Just the logistics, he's houseless without a phone. So we're going to go back to try and just show him the interview so he could see it. His name was Kazim in McPherson Square. If you want to send blankets, food, anything, if you're in Philadelphia or driving distance, you could go down to McPherson Square. Unfortunately, there's houseless people all over the place. And if you are questioning why am I calling it houseless, I've learned this over the years. You know, the narrative is homeless, but these communities are their homes. These communities are their neighborhoods. And, you know, the saying goes, home is where the heart is, so you wouldn't want to say somebody's homeless, symbolizing, you know, they're without a house. They're really just without dwellings. They're without a structure to live in. So that's why I call them houseless. But I'm really excited today. And by the way, smash the like button, thumbs up under the live stream. More people that press the like button, the more people that will see this live stream. I'm sorry for wearing my Joe Biden aviators, but it's sunny. It's sunny and hot where we are. But it is Pride Month. And I came across this story on Twitter, and it's really outrageous. So I wanted to introduce Salem, who lives in Philadelphia, his partner, Zane. Salem happens to be running for Congress here, so we'll talk about that in a bit. But you guys have lived in Philadelphia, I assume, for many years. And several years ago, you both were working at the local Applebees. So start from the beginning. Tell me about what was it like working at Applebees? Was management, you know, good, bad, defending you when issues with customers? What was the issues at Applebees leading up to really discriminatory things that were said to you from a customer?
So working at Applebees was an abusive environment, as you know, the restaurant industry generally is. It was a toxic work environment. It was just generally not healthy. The management never sided with the workers. They never protected workers. They took the customer is always right to a new level. So they sided with the customers no matter how abusive customers would be, no matter how toxic they would be. Harassing they were. And actually, when I was a manager in training, they actually had meetings where they would tell us, like, we need to get rid of this person, so we need to find a way to get rid of them. And we would literally sit in these meetings and they would conspire about how to get rid of certain employees that they didn't like through illegitimate means. I would object to things like that, as well as telling folks who are working doubles they can't take breaks, which could be 12 hours at a time. refusing to give them any food, even if it was dead food, which is a restaurant term for, a dish got screwed up and now it can't be served. So they had a policy where you always threw it in the trash and it could never go towards any of the workers. And I objected to some of these things in meetings, and they essentially told me that I was going to have to leave behind my socialist and humanitarian ideas in order to succeed with them.
So you're a proud socialist. I assume, just in discussion with coworkers or whatever, some of your political ideologies came up. So it seems to me they didn't like the fact that you were a socialist.
Yeah, they definitely were not on board with that at all.
And, were you experiencing some of the same issues with management as your partner?
Similarly, yeah. It was largely when a lot of people here in Philadelphia know that the Applebees on the Roosevelt Boulevard burned down. So a lot of these incidents really occurred when a lot of the people from that Applebees came to ours, which was in Port Richmond. And a lot of their management had their way of doing things and wanted things done their way, and they just kind of came in and started to change everything in our restaurant, and ultimately I think that wasn't received well. I feel that's an issue a lot of the times with management in any company. Someone always wants to come in who's never been there and say things are going to change and we're going to start doing things this way, and I don't feel that's ever really received well, especially by people who've had jobs there for years. Nobody wants to feel they run a store better than a manager that just came in and is trying to fix a system that isn't broken. So that was a lot of what started the wrench in the gears, I feel so things snowballed out from there. At one point we were on vacation for Christmas, and we got people to cover our shifts, and when because we extended our vacation, so we found some people to cover our shifts because we were going to be later than we thought we were. And they ended up sending one of the people who was covering my shift home, and then tried to write me up for not showing up for the shift. And I was you sent them home. So I ended up refusing to sign the write-up for that, and nothing ever happened from that. But that was shortly before all of this other stuff happened, and shortly before the incident with a customer where I was called a derogatory term in the restaurant in front of the customers and management and other employees, and management didn't do anything about the customer or the situation, and actually protected the manager who didn't do anything.
I want to get to that, but just before I ask about that, you were describing working double shifts, no breaks. If you're working double shifts and all that, I assume this is a busy Applebee's, a lot of customers. So obviously you both and your coworkers were paid really good salaries, great benefits, paid vacation, all that. Tell me about the pay, benefits, and all that at this busy Applebee's.
So for starters, servers made about $3 an hour, somewhere around there. $2.83. Hosts also made around $4 an hour, and were paid the additional amount to make up to minimum wage from servers. So they would pull tip out from servers and pay the host, and they would also do that with bartenders, who also made about $3 an hour. So essentially nobody who's working front of house is getting paid even minimum wage on an hourly level. There were no benefits to my knowledge. They introduced some form of healthcare option, but it was still
for people who worked 40 hours a week, I believe.
So yeah, it was only for people that worked 40 hours a week, but then they wouldn't schedule most people for 40 hours a week. So yeah, it was just another example of them trying to exploit everybody in the restaurant business, as the restaurant industry does, exploits people that really have no other options, because most of the people who are working in restaurants are very underprivileged, they're poor, they're there because they have to be, and with that kind of environment in restaurant work, which is, again, very abusive, very toxic, very unhealthy, people wouldn't choose to be there unless they absolutely had to be to live.
So I want to fast forward and remember, smash the like button right under the video. Please share this live stream. We also need your support to keep going on this trip. statuscoup.com/theotherpandemic. statuscoup.com/theotherpandemic. A lot of great donations yesterday. We need more. We're going from here to Pottsville, Pennsylvania for a really good story tomorrow. Is it tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow. Thursday, we're headed to Cleveland. Friday, we might have a very big interview for you. Hint, hint. Don't want to say who because, subject to being flaked on, but I don't think we're going to be flaked on. Big interview coming up Friday. Please support us. statuscoup.com/theevictiontour. So you're working one day, and just set it up. What precipitated a customer calling you? If you don't mind me, I just want to report it accurately. A customer called you a faggot.
Yeah, so basically this happened July of 2017, I believe. And a customer had come in, a single woman with a child, and I didn't know this at the time, but she had come in kind of with an attitude, was sat. It was a busy day, so I had maybe 4 or 5 tables, which is pretty busy for a server. Most people max out around 4 or 5, I feel like your good servers can take a few more maybe. But so I had about 4 or 5 tables, and I was seated with this woman, and I was taking care of everybody. I took her order, I put her food in the system, her salad came out, and as I'm serving everyone else, she asked me about the chicken tenders that she ordered for her son. So I told her that they were probably working on them and that I would check on them, and I was really, like I said, busy at the time, so I didn't get to go back immediately. And she stopped me again before I had gotten back and copped an attitude and was where are the chicken tenders? I think she said something to the effect of if I'm going to be done with my salad before they come out, then I don't want them. And she had ordered other food. She ordered another appetizer of boneless wings. So I was like, you still have more food to have. This isn't all you ordered. So anyway, I'm at the server station, and another server had asked me what had happened. So I was describing the situation, and I said fried food's going to take longer than a salad. And then she becomes irate and starts yelling across the restaurant about if I was I talking about her and this, that, and the other. And I told her I didn't have time to go back and forth with her at the moment. And I went to the back to check on her food, which was up. I brought it out to her. And I went by serving on my other tables, go by to check on her, and she's like, well, don't talk to me because I just asked you a question. And I was like, okay, well, I'm your server, I have to communicate with you. And she was like, well, get me another server. So I was like, okay, more than happy to at this point. So explain what's happening to the manager on duty, the table gets transferred. And the manager wanted the other server to apologize for me to this woman. And at this point, which she was like, no, I'm not really going to do that. And so, anyway, everything progresses until she's, getting up to take her kid to the bathroom. And coincidentally, I was, walking past her at this point. And she, starts, watch where you're going, faggot. And, starts, talking about, she's gonna beat my ass and coming towards me, and I was just I don't know how I contained myself at this time, but I was like, I'm not doing this with you, ma'am, I'm not doing this with you. And I went up to the manager, and she just kept repeating that she was gonna beat my ass and calling me faggot. And so the manager was at the front and like saw this happen, and I was like, she needs to like leave. She's like using homophobic slurs. She's making people feel unsafe and like causing a scene in the restaurant. And the manager did not respond to me, and then proceeded to, I guess, just like let her stay there, and didn't really like do anything about the situation like that unfolded. And both of us actually ended up getting sent home that day because we were told so that everyone could cool off. That was the quote. But we were relatively calm at this point, and the woman had left, and we were just trying to figure out like why she didn't do anything about it. And Salem actually like had a conversation with her privately like about it. I don't know if you want to.
What was that conversation like after the irate kooky customer and homophobic customer? When you spoke with the female manager, what was that conversation like?
So the conversation started because I asked her if she was going to do anything about it. This conversation started before the customer had left the restaurant. She was still dining. And I asked the manager if she was going to step in and do something. And she said no. And I said, it's your job to do something. Like, part of being a manager is also protecting your employees, especially from, like, you know, threats of violence and homophobic language. Like, that's a legal thing. That's not just a policy thing. So we went back and forth a little bit on that, and I essentially said, well, you wouldn't allow a customer to go up to like a black worker and call them the N-word. And she said, yes, I would. That's part of the job. And I said, that's not in the job description. I don't think that's part of the job. And she essentially said, well, I'm not going to go back and forth with you. And I was like, well, I'm not forcing you to go back and forth with me. You can stop talking to me at any time. And at this point was when she started talking about the fact that she was going to send both of us home.
So basically, because your partner caused an issue, which obviously he was discriminated against, they were going to be punitive and punish you as well and send you home to cool off. Right. So what happened next in terms of, were you told to come back for your normal shift the next day? What was the follow-up?
So we were told to come back for our shifts and pretty much resume as if nothing had happened. And at that point, neither of us felt safe, because if they're going to allow LGBTQ people to be treated that way, then obviously that's not a safe work environment for us. So we did go back and work our shifts per usual. He immediately called HR. I believe he also immediately emailed them. And, you know, they started with the typical, like, oh, this isn't acceptable, like, you know, we're going to do something about this, and then, like, we never heard anything back. So
this was HR in Philadelphia or corporate national HR?
So it's still, yeah, it's a franchise. So it's owned by the Rose Group, all the Applebees in the Philly area. So it was more local HR.
So what's amazing to me here, customer's always right, but I would assume, maybe I'm naive, that if an irate woman is calling you that discriminatory term, I don't know, I assume most customers are not that way. Were there other customers that heard this? Did they seem ticked off or kind of didn't pay attention, ignored it? What were the other customers' reaction to this woman flipping out and saying these things to you?
So, like, most of the customers that, like, you know, witnessed everything transpire that I communicated with were very, like, sympathetic and just kind of, like, shocked, I guess, you know, that, like, that had occurred. And they were, like, you know, they, like, said that I handled it really well. And they were, like, you know, like I said, just very sympathetic and understanding about it. like there were rude customers there because it's not like, you know, the best area, but I mean, like, it generally wasn't quite like, we didn't have to usually tolerate stuff quite that bad. I mean, like, you know, there are obviously a few incidents where, like, I could, you know, say that I feel like they should have handled differently, and not even just in regards to, like, LGBTQ people, but in regards to, like, women. They would let, you know, like, male customers, like, you know, say very suggestive things to, like, female waitresses, you know, things like that. So yeah, it was just like overall like a pretty toxic like work environment, but like the risk, like most customers like weren't like, you know, awful to deal with like on that level.
So you're sent home. The manager basically tells you to, you know, deal with it. According to you, says, yeah, if the N-word was used, that's part of the job. What comes next? Was there any follow-up from that manager or the people in the restaurant? And when did it eventually evolve into them trying to push you out of the restaurant?
So, like Salem said, we contacted like HR about the situation, and they gave us like the, you know, we don't tolerate this. That's like, you know, it should have been handled differently. So from that point, I was like, okay, and they were like, we'll follow up with you, I think, or something to that effect. And they didn't really do anything. Like the manager who was on duty, like, you know, didn't receive any like demotion, or like I saw them have like a conversation with her at one point shortly after, but I mean, like, that's as far as I know. And when I complained again about like, well, I don't think anything happened from this, and they told me that, oh, well, it did, but we just don't, you know, disclose all the details like about like a situation, which, you know, I understand to some effect. Like, I know workers talk and whatnot, but like with me being like the person who was like generally affected, and like with it being something like this where like people could feel unsafe, and like, you know, additionally she's saying like other, you know, like minority groups she would let, you know, things happen to, and other things let them feel unsafe. Like, I think it's reasonable to ask like, what are you doing like about this, like what's being done specifically in regards to this manager who said they'd let these things happen to people, and like they didn't want to, you know, disclose any of that information. And, you know, I guess that's their right, but like ultimately I saw it as more of a protection because she still had a job, like nothing happened down the road, like leading up until the time when we left, and even like afterwards, because, you know, we knew people there for a while afterwards who we still, you know, had communication with, and they said she was still there for some time. So ultimately, I don't think anything happened, and I think HR more or less protected this person, as opposed to, you know, defending like the, in this case, LGBTQ people, but in general, you know, marginalized communities, like from, you know, attacks. And I don't want to make it seem either like this was, you know, an exclusive incident. Like this has things like this, and, you know, like just discrimination in general happens in, you know, the restaurant industry all the time, especially in like Philadelphia, and I know it occurs, you know, across the country as well. And I definitely think that there needs to be some serious like legislation to address like the inequities that people suffer from that industry. Like, you know, there are so many rules for almost every industry in regards to how much you can work people, when you can schedule them, when they're scheduled, like how far in advance, like you have to let people know when they're working, and like none of those rules apply in like the restaurant industry. People find out that they have to work less than like 24 hours before they have to come in sometimes, and like I just think it's a complete failure of that system. I think it's just a, you know, a failure of like a capitalist system, because like in this case they were more concerned about this customer, they were more concerned with this customer's money, which was all of like a $30 check, than they were about protecting like marginalized communities and like LGBTQ people and the like.
And it didn't stop there, though, because essentially they then wanted to transfer you or force you out, and they even kind of pitted you against you, partners, romantic partners. So kind of talk about, when did it start creeping to they wanted to transfer you? What was did they give you a reason they wanted to transfer you? And then we'll get to what your role in that was.
Yeah, so initially, like right after the incident, my hours were cut. I think I initially had like 5 shifts a week, something like that. And the following week it was cut to 4, and the week after that it was cut to 3. And additionally, they took shifts, like the way the restaurant was set up, like people worked in the area that like was in the bar, and like that was like an area where you made more money and was like sat more heavily and was for like good servers. And I had like 2 shifts there. I think they were both on the weekend, but they took those from me in addition to like taking the 2 other shifts like from me. And I think by that point was when the general manager at the time pulled Salem aside and like told him that like one of us had to transfer or something because it was like a conflict of interest following this incident.
What was the conflict of interest? The fact that you guys are partners? I'm pretty confident that in many workplaces, there's married couples that work together, there's boyfriends and girlfriends, brothers and sisters. Tell me about when HR or whomever approached you, Salem.
So it started with the general manager at the time kind of pulling me to the side and saying that because Zane had caused problems that they had to deal with, that their answer to that was for him to transfer or quit, or that I could be demoted. And mind you, we also had multiple heterosexual couples that worked together, and that even included power dynamics at times, with some of them being managers and things of that nature. So that felt really targeted and really just reinforcing the homophobia that was already present.
Yeah, at one point the bartender, what was it? The bartender was working, or like one of the bartenders was like living with one of the managers or something to that effect.
And none of that was ever brought up as a conflict of interest. And mind you, Zane and I had already been working at that store together for at least a year, and nobody had ever said anything about it being a conflict of interest. They had actually promoted me to a manager in training while we were still both working in the store together, and everybody knew that, you know, we were in a relationship. So obviously it wasn't a conflict of interest when you promoted me or when you hired both of us, knowing, because when they hired him, they knew that he was in a relationship with me. So they hired us that way, they promoted me that way, and it didn't become a conflict of interest until they were reported to HR for homophobia.
And you said you were a manager in training, so did they essentially retaliate against you, threatening, if you don't get your partner to get out of here, your job might be on the line?
So they said that they would demote me to doing only to-go, which is interesting because I didn't really work to-go, and it was the only position where they paid minimum wage hourly, but I made more money serving, even hosting, and of course, you know, on managing shifts. So they were essentially trying to make it so that I wouldn't have enough money to live, because you can't live on, you know, $7.25 in Philadelphia, or, you know, in most places in the country. So yeah, they essentially were like, hey, like, your partner has to go, or like, we're gonna cut off all your money.
And you know, the restaurant industry, like so many, I'm thinking Amazon too, these workers take a lot of abuse because it's survival. They don't have many choices. Were colleagues, waiters, managers, hosts, were any of them kind of sticking up for you, asking the managers what's going on, or was it essentially you two on your own?
It was essentially us two on our own, although a lot of the workers, servers, hosts, bartenders, etc., most of them sided with us privately, verbally, but I think most people were afraid of speaking up just because those particular managers had a tendency to fire people for any and every reason. Like I mentioned earlier, they would literally conspire ways to get rid of people. It was very much like a controlling, like authoritative sort of environment, and it was just so yeah. Like workers sided with us, but they were afraid of like losing their own source of income, their own resources.
So, how did it ultimately end up? What precipitated you leaving, and what precipitated you leaving?
So ultimately, like, the handling of that incident, like, and seeing, like, nothing really transpire on the front of, like, that manager, and, like, just everything that happened beyond that, basically led to us, like, looking, like, elsewhere for work, and, like, finally, like, finding something, and both being like, we're, like, done here, because, like, at that point, like, a lot of the people we knew that worked there didn't work there anymore. Like, it was, a totally different environment, a toxic environment. Like, it had been a toxic environment. So, yeah, ultimately, like, just the handling of that situation, and, like, how negative the environment is, like, both physically and, like, mentally and emotionally, like, is what inevitably led both of us to leaving.
And obviously you weren't there at Applebee's during the pandemic, but you know people in the industry, you might know people that still work there. I'm assuming they weren't, vigilant and responsible at all times. Can you tell me about anything you know, whether it be this Applebee's or other restaurants that were endangering workers?
Sure. So as far as the pandemic goes, we had one person that we actually worked with who was there during this incident, who still works at Applebee's, though at a different location here in Philly. They actually recently just fired her a few days ago after having worked there for 11 years. Because a customer got irate with her and complained to the managers saying that someone like her shouldn't be allowed to work there, and they just fired her on the spot.
What does someone like her mean?
They said she was rude. I'm not sure of the super specifics of, that situation, so I don't want to speak too much on it. I can say that from working with her that she was very pleasant. She's very charismatic. Most of the customers loved her. She had regulars that requested her. So this was very much like an isolated incident, something that I was even surprised that anyone would complain about her. But, you work in an industry, you're in a place long enough, somebody's going to complain about you at some point. But their response after 11 years was just to fire her. And she'd already been telling me, because she was employed there before the pandemic, she wasn't on unemployment or anything like that, that she was only making between like $15 and $30 to $35 per shift during the pandemic. She was having a lot of trouble just surviving at all. And for them to just take that last bit of livelihood she had, during a time like this is just like inhumane.
And to me, there's more. By the way, just to kind of cross my whatever that phrase is, we did reach out to Applebee's. Haven't heard back, but they were given an opportunity to comment. So obviously we put in the headline alleged. They didn't respond for comment. We'll see if they do. But Applebee's corporate did not respond to us. So what's striking to me is put aside race, gender, sexual preference. You guys are already making a non-living wage. And when they say the customer is always right, I worked for my dad's jewelry store back in the day. That mentality is really about more, even if somebody's a pain in the ass, just appease them. But there are laws, again, like you said, there are laws against retaliation, sexual discrimination, gender discrimination, this and that. But it seems to me you were getting it on all ends. No, like very little pay, unstable shifts, and irate customers. If they threatened to beat you up, putting aside the discrimination, you were basically told to just suck it up. Obviously, that's not an isolated incident, like you said. This is happening everywhere, which is really important because, as I talked about a week or two ago, the media, the Democratic Party, Biden, we're back. The economy's roaring back. The jobs in May were, I think, 500,000 or so, but over half of them were hospitality. Restaurants, bars, hotel managers. So not exactly like these jobs roaring back are, vibrant, union, middle-class jobs. I'm not, not poo-pooing restaurant workers, but it's survival work, not livable wages. So this narrative by the media, by the Democrats, Republicans say it too, is false. This is not good work, and you're also being discriminated against and not defended by your employer.
Yeah, it's and that's one thing a lot of people don't talk about. Like, Democrats often like to brag about, what they're doing under their administration. And the thing about, bringing jobs back and stuff like that, like bringing back survivalist jobs that don't even pay as much as unemployment was paying for people who couldn't get jobs, this whole time, that's not helpful. It's not helpful at all. It would be more helpful for these people to stay unemployed on unemployment than to go back to an abusive, toxic environment where they can't even make living wages. It's not a win.
I honestly, and like you said, not to shit on restaurant work because it's hard work, it's valid work, but I wouldn't consider hospitality and restaurant jobs like the revolving door that industry is, like jobs coming back, because those jobs are there and then they're gone in a month because either people can't deal with how toxic the environment is, or management's toxic and they want to get rid of people constantly because they're on some sort of power trip where they're firing people. So it's not stable work, and I don't consider those jobs concrete positions for anybody.
And remember, keep smashing the like button, share this live stream, super chats, or go to our fundraising page, statuscoup.com/theotherpandemic. We got, I don't even know, I think 2 more interviews lined up today. It's very hot, so please support us if you can. I wanted to ask you also, to me, you have this Democratic Party, the resistance, hashtag resistance. Everybody's woke, right? Everybody's woke. And with the George Floyd protests, which crossed the country, millions of people during a pandemic, we saw Chase, Bank of America, Amazon, whether it's on their websites, whether it's on their, actual storefront windows, Black Lives Matter, yada, 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 woke signaling for new initiatives for public-private partnerships to invest in black communities. So the talk is all good in that case about civil rights and, racism. But in practice, what is the protection for LGBTQ people economically and socially, whether it be at the restaurants, other lines of work, socially? Seems like there's a lot of talk, but in this case, a corporation could just do whatever it wants, basically blame the victim, he was the victim, and get away with it.
And I think this is actually really common. I think a lot of LGBTQ folks experience homophobia, queerphobia in the workplace. I think there's a lot of people of color that experience racism in the workplace. And the fact that these corporations tout, Black Lives Matter and Pride Month and all these things, that's a show, that's marketing, that's PR. They're not backing that up with policies to protect these communities or to help them economically or, keep them safe at all. They basically just want to exploit all of us and make more profit off of it. And I think that this is happening in a whole lot of different places, not everybody has the time, the the resources to get their story out there to be heard, because honestly, like in the United States, the point of HR is to protect the company. It's to protect the managers who are supposed to protect the company, and everything revolves around protecting profits. And you can't simultaneously prioritize the well-being of people in general, especially marginalized communities, as well as profit. You have to pick one. And in the United States, all these corporations have chosen profit.
And they've bought out the politicians that are supposed to be regulating them.
Yeah, I don't think that you can say, like, any of these people's lives matter to you. Like, even the ones who they protect the most, like the cishet straight people. Like, you can't say that any of these people's lives matter to you when you're constantly exploiting them. You're constantly paying them, like, slave and starvation wages. And the only people that you're protecting and the only people whose financial assets you're boosting are the CEOs, the partners, the owners, like the people at the top. Like, the glass never overfills for anyone else. It just gets bigger and holds more for the top. Like, you can't say that these people's lives matter when there's, you know, a wage gap for women, a wage gap for, like, people of color and black people, like indigenous people. You can't say that you care about these people when you're doing nothing to stand up for these people and nothing to fight for these people, and you're actively purchasing the politicians to fight against these people and fight against policies that liberate and protect these communities.
I want to ask you, because I think a lot of people are not homophobic and support LGBTQ, black people, but they kind of think, oh, I live in a major city. I see pride flags. I see where I live, there's like rainbow colors on the street and all those things. So it's not as big of a thing here, discrimination, you know, threats, whatever. But I don't know. I'm not a Philadelphia historian, but it seems to me there are discrimination problems here. I know in New York, D.C., LGBTQ, black, Asian, handicapped. I mean, I could go down the list. Sorry if I'm forgetting anyone. So can you kind of talk about, just because you're in a major city, which, by the way, is badly gentrified, it's not like you two are able to walk out, you know, just as yourselves, you know, in love without ever experiencing discrimination, you know, outside of work.
So I think that's absolutely true. I think there's this general idea, especially among the Democratic Party, that if you're in a major city like New York City or Philadelphia or, you know, something like that, that you won't face the same discrimination and you won't, you know, have the same oppression or, you know, things of that nature. And that's just not true because, you know, to be clear, like, just because you're a liberal or a progressive or a Democrat or a socialist, any of these things don't inherently mean that you can't also contribute to the problem or at least be, you know, complicit in the problem. So I think that we really need to dismantle this idea that, you know, oh, like it's a blue area, like you're safe. That's not always true. And also the fact that there's things just like, you know, racism isn't just like, oh, I don't like people of color. Like, it's, you know, systemic. It's something that's deeply ingrained and taught in our society. And queerphobia is the same way. There's layers to it. Like, you can be fine with gay marriage or equal rights or whatever, but, like, you can still harbor queerphobia unknowingly. And I think a lot of people assume that because they think they're on the right side of things that, like, they can't contribute to that issue, and that's just not true.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like, I'd like to take this moment to quote Malcolm X and say that, and he said that one of the most dangerous people was the white liberal, and I completely agree. Like there's just this idea that, you know, racism and homophobia, just all forms of bigotry are, like, very blatant and outright, and, like, you know, like, racism is people saying, I hate black people, and homophobia is people saying, I hate gay people, and stuff like that. And it's just not, like, there's very subtle, like, homophobia. There's very subtle, like, Islamophobia. There's subtle, like, forms of all bigotry. And, like, we grow up in a society, like, we're all raised in a society that's, like, centered around, like, all of these things that's built on, like, all this bigotry. And, like, it takes time to unlearn those things. Like, being, woke isn't, like, just, advocating for, like, the right politician or whatever. Like, it's making sure that you're, like, actively fighting for these communities and, like, standing up for people when no one else is. And, like, just because you think you are doesn't mean that you are, because, like, as an LGBTQ person, all too often I feel like there are a lot of, like, the white liberals that want to talk over, like, the radical LGBTQ voices in, like, the movement, and, like, want to, either silence those voices or, like, water them down into, a tame civility politics, like, aspect. And, like, I very much reject that premise, and, like, I think those people are very problematic, because it's like, you aren't here, like, facing these struggles. Like, you don't have to deal with, like, the inequities in society and, like, worrying about, like, that someone could, hit you across, like, the back of the head at any given moment, like, just for, being with your partner or, like, holding hands with them or something. And it's like, people think that, like, time in society is, like, dead, but it's like, it's still here. It might not be in New York, it might not, like, be blatant in Philadelphia or, in these metropolitan cities, but it still exists even in those cities. Like, it just exists more blatantly in, like, other areas. And, like, I feel like we hyper focus on that and ignore the subtleties of, like, liberal racism, because it's there and, like, it's something that needs to be addressed, but it doesn't get addressed.
I want to straight out, I'm stealing this from Veronica, the Philadelphia activist I interviewed yesterday. One of the best descriptions of the Republican Party and Democratic Party I've ever heard. Republican Party is a horror show and the Democratic Party is a fantasy. So what you're describing, I mean, I don't need to elaborate on the Republican Party's, LGBTQ protection program,
No, they're doing
which
great.
which doesn't exist, or, economic opportunities. But Democratic Party, I mean, let's look at Nancy Pelosi, for example. I mean, I was just in San Francisco at the end of my honeymoon. There's the Castro, which is a wonderful area that has, a lot of homosexual residents and LGBTQ-owned businesses and things like that. So there are enclaves where you could be a community, but...
And there's no problems, right? There's no problems because it's San Francisco and it's full of, like, Democrats. So clearly they can get a lot done. There's no homeless people. Everyone has health care and education, right?
Right. So that was my point, because, like, look, I don't know. I've been Chicago, New York, D.C., Portland, L.A., Seattle, Canada, Cleveland. I mean, it's all the same story. 15 minutes from here, actually maybe closer, but 15 minutes here in Kensington, where we were yesterday, it's like an episode of The Walking Dead. I don't mean to degrade the people living there, but, I mean, there's people passed out on the street, houseless people all over, people sleeping in the park. We spoke with a houseless person yesterday that was a construction worker and was laid off during the pandemic, been sleeping in the park under a train for over a year. His mother just died 4 days ago, couldn't even go to the funeral. This guy is really creative, has created skincare stuff and has done stuff in tech, but he can't even get back to a construction job because he doesn't have an address to put on an application. So this is all happening in Philadelphia, where this area is beautified and, privileged people, they have jobs, not that they don't work hard, are kind of disconnected from it. Meanwhile, we're being fed by CNBC, Biden, not the Republicans, that back to normal. Well, the normal was The Walking Dead in most of these cities. So I think that's a good segue. Like, you're running for Congress here as a socialist. Let's keep it real. Lee Carter down in Virginia ran as a socialist, for the right policies, but lost to Clinton ally Terry McAuliffe. Socialism has been made a boogie word. Frankly, I think Bernie made a lot of mistakes in the campaign. What motivated you to run? I assume it's kind of a mixed bowl of what happened at Applebees, the gentrification here, and many other things.
Yeah, so it was a few things. Like you said, it was poor work experience. I worked in restaurants waiting tables for over 10 years. It was the fact that I grew up extremely poor. The first place that my mother and I called home was an income-based apartment that was run by a nonprofit, which was the only reason that we were able to even secure a home at that time. And, over the years, being displaced multiple times until, finally finding, like, a secure area for, the last few years. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the fact that our district, particularly our neighborhood, started getting aggressively gentrified by luxury apartment buildings that are going up everywhere. You'll hear developers argue, oh, this is the going market rate, but that doesn't really make sense if you're in a district where the average income is less than $20,000. Like, market rate is not affordable for us. And so our neighborhood organized to push back against this development, and I was in charge of outreach, so I reached out to all the local politicians, local organizations trying to get help, even just to have a politician show up and speak at one of our demonstrations that we organized. And the vast majority of them straight up ignored us, and the ones that responded basically just said, sorry, not interested, or like, no.
And can I just ask, did any of those politicians take money from those real estate developers putting up the luxury apartments, pricing you out?
I'm so glad you asked. All of them did.
One of them is a developer.
Yeah, we have developers on city council. And most of, if not all of city council is funded by developers. I mean, you've seen Kensington. You know the state of my district. You see how these people are living, and where's the rent control legislation? Like, it's not coming from, city council. It's not coming from, state reps. It's not coming from the mayor. It's not coming from, the congressman. All Democrats. It's a Democratic city. There's very few, Republican districts around here at all. And our district is particularly Democratic.
None in the city.
Oh, yeah, there are none in the city. No red districts in the city. So this is, like, Democrats have control over everything. There's no reason, logically, that we're not seeing rent control, that we're not seeing, a real fight for housing for all. We're not seeing a real fight for, free education. We're not seeing any fight for the resources that these people need the most.
Or the policies these people run on. Like, they butter everyone up with the same progressive talking points, which I'm sure have been co-opted by the Democratic Party at this point. Like, we talk about Medicare for all. We talk about now housing for all is, getting its time in the sun, finally. We talk about a Green New Deal, but, like, what are we doing to achieve these things, especially in these, like, Democratic-controlled strongholds of, like, metropolitan cities? Like, we could, like, pave the way in, like, massive portions of the country, like New York, like San Francisco, LA, Philadelphia, like Pittsburgh. Like, we could pave the way for the rest of the country with, like, local Green New Deal legislation, but we don't do that.
But those same politicians that are developers, that are bought off, they're showing up to the gay pride parade, right?
Very much so. I am a very strong opponent of, like, corporate pride or pride TM, like rainbow capitalism, all the alternate, terminologies. Like, these people, as I already stated, like, they aren't doing anything for our communities. They're actively buying out politicians to work against our communities, and, like, they don't deserve a place at, like, at the one place that's supposed to be there for us to, like, celebrate, who we are, that is something that has been massively discriminated against for decades, and, like, still is today, but, like, is finally, like, just now, getting its time in the sun, and, like, its time, like, away from very serious harassment. Like, we're finally being treated, like people on some level, and like not like a mental illness or something. And like the people who bought out those politicians to fight to keep things like that, like keeping things like homosexuality a mental illness, who fought to keep those politicians in power, don't deserve a place where we celebrate now that they've decided that it's, politically convenient and economically convenient, and to, get them a higher capital during June.
And I think it's important to point out on a national level, I've seen this for many years. The Democratic Party, even though Biden narrowly won, did like a little autopsy, and they're saying, oh, we didn't have an economic message. That's why on the Senate and House level, we lost. They lost a lot of seats in the House that they were supposed to win. They didn't. They barely won back the Senate. They lost seats they thought they were going to win. And I think it's because most of these Democratic Party neoliberals think that Hispanics only care about immigration, LGBTQ people only care about LGBTQ issues, black people only care about civil rights issues, on and on we go. But like, you're just people. You kind of care about rent, health care. Can you kind of talk about, I mean, obviously the Republican Party is not vying for your vote, but Trump actually won more black people than he won in 2016. That's kind of pathetic if you're a Democratic Party. He won more Hispanic voters in 2020 than 2016. And frankly, if not for a unprecedented pandemic he lied about and badly mishandled, he'd still be the president. So what's your message to Democrats, whomever, about their jaded priorities and their jaded perception about what these communities care about?
Well, first I want to agree with you and say that like you said, there tends to be a lot of compartmentalizing with these issues, and say we put the black people in this box and they care about these issues. We'll put the gay people here. But all of these issues are overarching, and they all intersect. There's a lot of intersectionality on all of these issues. There's gay black people, gay Hispanic people, there's Afro Hispanic people who are affected by both, civil rights issues, as well as rights for other brown people, and immigration issues and LGBTQ issues, and the like. So I just think that like you said, the tendency to compartmentalize these things is just one aspect of the failure of the Democratic Party to adequately address what these communities really need, and the voter base that the Democratic Party has built over the years, which overwhelmingly agrees with policies that people progressives and socialist candidates are fighting for, but that the party apparatus and the establishment is completely fighting against and holding back, because they are funded, like you said, from things like the healthcare industry, developers, telecom, all of these industries, influence policy, because they buy out these politicians, and that ultimately impacts marginalized communities a lot more than it impacts anyone else, and usually negatively.
So I think one thing that a lot of Democratic politicians tend to do is have this idea that, oh, I support, LGBTQ people, I support Black Lives Matter, but, maybe I don't support Medicare for All or a Green New Deal or these things. And what they're failing to understand is they aren't things that you can compartmentalize and separate, right? Healthcare is an LGBTQ issue. Healthcare is a black issue. Healthcare is, an issue that affects all of us and those of us who are marginalized disproportionately. And the same is true with other progressive legislation, like housing. LGBTQ people are disproportionately impacted by housing, so are people of color. So when we're looking at these policies, we have to think about the fact that how do these policies affect these people? Because you can't separate it. You can't say, I support people of color and LGBTQ people, but I don't support, Medicare for All. You can't do that. And I think what a lot of this boils down to in this country is the fact that the overwhelming majority of our politicians are bought and paid for, and that's who they're ultimately accountable to, is their donors. They can say whatever they want. They often do say the right things, but they don't do them. They don't back them up with legislation. So it's intersectional. You can't cherry pick what you support or how you support it. Like, in order to be a trustable ally in politics, you can't be corporate funded, because if you're corporate funded, well, the corporations are not doing what's best for us. They're not doing what's best for LGBTQ people. They're not doing what's best for black people. And you can't serve them and serve us. So if you're taking corporate money, like right there, like, you're not an ally. You can't be an ally. You can support, like gay marriage all you want, but that doesn't inherently make you an ally. So we really have to look at how policies affect marginalized communities, as well as the people who are talking about these policies, where their funding comes from.
And to go into that a little bit more, like, even like more specifically too, like people who want to say like, oh, well, I support Medicare for all, but I don't think like trans people's transition surgery should be included. Like, that's an issue. Like, that's an LGBTQ issue that needs to be like covered, because like transitioning is expensive. Like, hormones are expensive. Like, people deserve like the right to, I'm not saying every trans person lives in dysphoria, but like a lot of them suffer from, body dysphoria, and like they deserve to have access to, excuse me, not access. Let me not use that word. I hate that. They deserve to have like these things readily like available to them, like at no cost. Like, they should be able to have these transitions and these hormones available to them, and like for free, because that it's healthcare. It's a form of healthcare. Like, you can't dissect Medicare for all and say accept trans people, or accept mental health care, or accept pharmaceuticals or something. Like, it's all like, it's a bundled package. And like, additionally, like Salem was talking about, like, politicians are beholden to like who they take their money from. So like, if they're taking money from utility companies or the telecom industry, then they're not going to be fighting for like universal internet, or they're not going to be fighting for, anything. Yeah, net neutrality. Like, they're not going to be like, people who take from healthcare and pharmaceutical aren't going to be fighting for Medicare for all. And additionally, I want to point out that like, there's a large issue too in like nonprofits these days, because anybody can open a nonprofit, and a lot of rich people do now. And there's like this whole nonprofit industrial complex that allows and runs candidates these days, progressive candidates, which are funded by billionaires or funded by corporations. And like, a 501c3 or a 501c4 doesn't necessarily have to disclose its donors, and a lot of them don't. But a lot of these progressive politicians get a big check from these nonprofits and cakewalk in a primary election or a general election without anyone thinking the wiser about where that money really came from. And when you really boil it down to what it is, that money did not come from grassroots donors, like when it came from places like Democracy Alliance or something, some associated organization.
And I'm trying to ask this in every interview I do, whatever the topic. I'm sure the local media here, or the national media, knocking down your doors to cover your campaign. You tweeted about this. It got some reaction, what happened a couple years ago at Applebees. Is the local media, covering these things? Because right now the national media, it's like the Super Bowl right now with Biden meeting Putin. That's all they're talking about. Analysis, strategy, psychology, that's all they're talking about. Meanwhile, millions of people are about to be evicted. A lot states are already taking away unemployment from people prematurely. Houselessness is exploding all over this country, and is going to explode further after the eviction moratorium ends. But Russia and Putin and Biden and tough talk. Is the local media covering these types of issues here?
Not really. I think it's worth noting that like a lot of certain local media outlets here are like venture capitalist projects. So, I'm sure that has absolutely nothing to do with what they do and don't cover. So no, what's interesting actually is that the work I was doing before I ran for Congress was doing public relations, trying to get press, trying to get news for people, get it in the hands of journalists. And I had no problem with that up until I ran for office, and suddenly nobody wants to cover anything. So I wasn't necessarily surprised, but it's very interesting how that works.
I just wanted to ask. I thought we didn't like presidents that met with dictators. I was under the impression that was, not good and that we didn't like Putin. So I'm interested to know the rationalization that we now have as to why it's a good thing that our president's meeting with Putin. But just to be frank, I don't really care what president meets with Putin. Like, you're a president. You have to meet with, like, foreign leaders. Like, it has to happen. It's part of the job. Do you
feel the media here is covering these types of stories?
I don't think they do a very adequate job of covering much of anything in this city. I feel like there is, specifically in Philadelphia, a concerted effort from specific individuals to network with local journalists and to ensure that whatever political agenda that they're pushing for, which is generally a neoliberal one, gets pushed and promoted to everybody, and that their candidates and the things that they want to discuss and write about get the attention that they want them to get, and anybody that's on the outside is blacked out. Anything that we don't want to talk about is off limits, because there has been virtually little to no reception from other than maybe one local media contact about Salem's campaign, but yet they are very interested in a lot of the other progressive candidates that run with very similar, if not the same, messaging of our campaign. So it's been very interesting to watch from a campaign perspective and working with and on a campaign, as opposed to just being a voter or someone who's politically engaged and seeing how these things work. It's a totally different view, perspective on things, and you definitely see who's pushing an agenda versus actually pushing for the liberation of these marginalized communities, as well as for environmental protections and things of that nature.
And last question, we got progressives in the House, we got Bernie that frankly might agree on the policies, but seem to have been kind of seduced by Washington's take the long game strategy.
Have to get the crumbs.
Have to get the crumbs. Let's try and work with our moderate to conservative Democrats, push them over to our side. Let's not force votes or burn down the House, even though we said we were going to burn down the House. I don't think they're terrible people, but I don't exactly think they're strategic, acting courageous. You're running for the House. There's a lot of cynical progressives right now saying, I don't want to donate to candidates anymore. I don't want to volunteer for candidates anymore. They speak progressive language. They pretend they're revolutionary. And then they go on magazine covers with Nancy Pelosi. And then they call her Mama Bear. And then they vote present. Bernie's a whole different topic. But if you won, you'd be joining the House, Congress. So what exactly is your thought about why should progressives watching, still give a chance to candidates like you?
So, first, I think the whole long game narrative is a cop-out. It's not necessary. Great example. You mentioned Lee Carter earlier. he was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates and managed to get an insulin cap legislation passed, right? And that's like a Congress full of corporate funded, people taking money from the healthcare and industrial complex. And so, like, he got it done, right? Like, we can get it done without... And he got marijuana legalization passed. And so I think being effective, first of all, is like there's this false narrative that like, oh, you can't do this without, having enough votes and cozying up to this person and making deals and all this, that, and the other. Like, no, you need to put forward the legislation you ran on, and, if they vote it down, be like, hey, like, I put this forward, like, look what they're doing, build public pressure. And I totally understand the cynicism against, progressive politicians at this point. I've been burned and disappointed by many of them. In college, I volunteered for Barack Obama, worked to get him elected, and he massively disappointed. And maybe, part of that was me being young and naive. Me too. But, regardless, I think another thing we have to do is stop thinking about, like, getting progressives elected just for... well, what can they get passed? Do they have the numbers for this? It's not all about having the majority all the time. Like we saw with Force the Vote, the progressives didn't need a majority in Congress in order to, withhold that vote and to, like, call for more action on things they wanted. So there's other tactics that we can do like that in building public pressure and things of that sort of nature. So we're able to do these things without, thinking the traditional way or the Washington brain way, like, cozy up to this person, get this amount of votes. Like, I think that's dead, and I think we really need to abandon the approach of I'm going to get incrementalism and instead fight for bold policy and start setting precedent for these things to get passed.
Where could people find more about you and your campaign?
Social media is Salem for Congress with the number 4. My website is Salem for Congress with the actual word for, because that's not confusing or anything.
Parting words, Zane?
Just, like, do your homework on, like, the people you vote for. Look at, like, who's funding them. Like, look at, like, their finances. Like, pull up that FEC document. Like, go through it. Like, find, if it's a local politician, pull up your state, like, campaign finance and go through that, because, like, that's where you will find, like, the interests of, like, these people, including the progressives, including the Republicans, including the corporate Democrats, like, all of them. Like, the answers are there, and, like, if you want to know what they're going to vote for, what they're going to support, what industry they're taking money from, that's all you have to look at, and that's where the answers are. It's not a fun thing to go through, but it will answer pretty much any question you have, and it'll tell you where their loyalties lie. And thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I want to, if she will come, bring on Jen for a few minutes. Could you scoot down there? Whew, it's hot. Whew, it's hot. Jen might not be on camera yet, but she's been doing God's work getting this around. I don't know if you know, but YouTube's not showing our live streams to our 118,000 subscribers. I don't know if you know about that. We have 118,000 subscribers. I mean, we have to literally send smoke signals to get for our subscribers to know when we're live. I think the last time we were recommended on YouTube is probably before I was born. Please always share these live streams. We got a couple more coming up today, I believe. Really important stuff going on tomorrow. Jen, take it from here.
Sir. Well, first of all, I want to say this stick has to go, guys. Let's vote. Does Jordan need his Moses stick now that everyone's vaccinated? Like, do we need this? No, we don't need this, right?
It's not for COVID. It's so I don't have to do this for 20 minutes.
It could be shorter. Let's vote on this, because this is like a little alarming. I don't know. Okay, so I can't handle this. Okay, so I want to say thank you guys so much for your incredible support. Kelly Elaine just gave an amazing super chat, $100, saying the coverage is at the crux of our quality of life and future. Thanks status quo. Elect far more progressives. Join our revolution. Don't let the corporate overlords deny what Bernie started for us. We also have Lana Del Hates the Clock, Tiara, Raymond Dew, Yar Neverett, Lynn B. So many folks are being incredible on Cash App. We have Sheldon, Thaddeus, or Thad, I don't know how you would say it, Erickson. So many people are really helping to support us, and I think it's important to emphasize that. Do you see CNN around? Did you see CNN yesterday? No, of course not. The incredible, and I hope you did not miss it, interview that Jordan did with Kazim was just, I broke down in tears after the interview for a few reasons, but yeah, thank you, Jordan. Thank you for your helpful explanation, right? For a lot of reasons, but the Kensington area where we were in Philly is just devastating. There's a lot of drug usage and things like that there, but that's not the focus. Why are people using? It's because our society is devastated and awful, and the working class is not able to succeed anymore if they ever were. Certain populations have never been allowed to succeed in this country, and it's just getting worse. And so what you see when you walk around, yeah, sure, the drugs, but what you see is systemic issues. So many people there are houseless. We were in McPherson Park, and that is where Jordan interviewed Kazim, who was really just one of the saddest stories I've ever heard. But he's not giving up. His mother passed away 4 days ago. He's lost children, his family. He works in construction, of course, can't find work at the moment, and it's really just a heartbreaking interview. He's someone who, obviously, he's down on his luck. He does not have a home. As Veronica taught us to say, he doesn't have a traditional living structure. And in the midst of that, in the midst of not having money for himself, for his own needs, he walks around making sure that his friends, his other houseless friends without traditional living structures, have had enough food for the day. He gives as much as he can of himself. And I don't know, I found him a real inspiration. I really hope everyone checks that out. But that's the kind of reporting that we're doing on this trip. And I'm proud of that. It's not CNN, it's not MSNBC. And well, not other outlets that we will not name. You guys probably heard, right? You can guess. And I think that's good. But the reality, too, is that this trip is going to cost several $1,000s. Like, that's just the reality. We're going to several states, and hotel costs, gas costs, which is skyrocketing, food, the cost of food, just the general cost of travel, the live view streaming cost, which is the device that we use to go live in the field.
The parking scams.
The parking here is just absurd, the amount of money. But to get from interview to interview, we got to do what we got to do. And the truth is, we can't do this without you guys. We truly can't. We basically took a leap of faith in taking this trip. We're in Pennsylvania right now. We're going in Philly specifically, and tomorrow we're going to Pottsville. Onward from there, we're going to Ohio. We would also like to go to West Virginia to further uncover in person, and check out our Substack if you haven't yet, statuscoup.substack.com. But Jordan's been doing incredible reporting on what's going down in West Virginia. We would like to expose Joe Manchin in person, do some in-person digging on what is happening there, in-person digging on what is happening with the racism, extreme, blatant racism that's happening with the West Virginia Democrats. And yeah, as I said, you can check out those stories, some exclusive stories, exclusive audio, statuscoup.substack.com. But we want to do that in person. Also, last summer, you'll remember Jordan interviewed Bianca Austin, Breonna Taylor's aunt. And that was one of the most important interviews I feel that Jordan has done, that we've done as a company. We've done so many important interviews, but Breonna Taylor has not gotten justice. Not that she ever will truly, but not even the semblance of justice, not even approaching justice. And where's her name in the media right now? It's nowhere. I want us to be able to get to Kentucky. I want us to be able to get to Louisville. I want us to be able to get to West Virginia. And we can't do that if we don't have your support. Thank you everyone who is stepping up. We completely understand it's financially difficult for so many people right now. All we ask of you is to share our stuff, let people know about Status Coup on all your social, etc. But if it is financially possible for you, whether it's $5 or $20, or if you maybe have some more room in your budget, some larger amounts, please help us out so that we can shine a light on what is going on in this country. Where else, would you have heard Salem and Zane's story? Can you believe that this is happening? Of course you can believe it, but because this country is what it is and people are who they are and it's awful, but it needs to be exposed and called out, and that's what we're here to do. We're keeping up with everything that's happening, posting behind the scenes photos, and I'm updating daily links of the stories we're covering and what we're doing. And there's some really cool updates on statuscoup.com/theotherpandemic. But that is also a page where you can go specifically to help us fund this trip. statuscoup.com/theotherpandemic. We, of course, have our Cash App, which is $statuscoup. There are a lot of things you can do to support us. I'm not ashamed to say we do need your help in order to continue funding this trip and this important reporting.
And we have more interviews today, I think.
We do. We have upcoming, I actually pushed it back, which Jordan doesn't know yet, to 5. Around 5 p.m. Eastern, we are going to be interviewing Professor Senna, who is a law professor at Villanova, and she's suing on behalf of the houseless community, the very marginalized communities. And so we're going to speak to her about what she's doing and potentially go to some encampments. We're not going to meet first at the encampments, but we will have footage later on. We have to be extremely careful and respectful of who wants to be on camera and who doesn't, but we will do what we can to bring you that story. We hope to meet up again with Kazim, and we also have an interview. I hope you guys remember when John was down in North Carolina in Elizabeth City. He covered a lot of really important things. There were a lot of important speakers, a lot of important protests for Andrew Brown Jr., who was, of course, murdered by police. Yet another black man murdered by police. But there was a speaker who had come all the way down from Philly because she kind of felt called to, and her name is Lamia. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. I will double check with her once we meet with her. But she is a grief and trauma counselor here in Philadelphia who does a lot of work with the black and brown and immigrant communities, indigenous folks, and specifically focusing on how to, I don't want to speak for her, but how to kind of brace for those communities, how to brace yourself for these interactions with police mentally and emotionally and things like that, and also how to deal with, and for children as well, the ongoing trauma. So it's not just trauma in the past. This is trauma that happens over and over and over again. All the time, there are new names of folks who have been murdered by police. And so she specializes in helping those communities. So she has a lot of really important things to say. And I'm looking forward to those interviews, certainly. And tomorrow morning, I don't know that we'll go live from this. And they do this all the time, but tomorrow morning it's going to be even bigger. So Kensington, remember we just talked about Kensington, where Jordan did the interview with Kazim yesterday, and where we met with Veronica of Club Sandwich Philly. The police are doing a sweep of these houseless folks. So their belongings, which they are their belongings, are at risk. They're going to have to move yet again. These folks have been moved constantly by the police because they're not allowed, apparently, to live their lives. And it is our system, it is our country that has put them in the position that they're in right now. And now the police are kicking them out of being able to sleep on the ground. You know, what a country. So that's happening early in the morning tomorrow. We're going to go there, I believe around 6 or 7. And not sure, again, if we'll be live or not, but we will bring you reporting from there. And these cameras need to be here to shine a light on what the police are doing. There will be protesters there who are protesting against what the police are doing, against the sweep. But sadly and horrifyingly, there are also going to be counter-protesters. Can you imagine being a person who is sick enough in the head to protest against like houseless people and letting them be alive and live? Imagine that. I just can't, I can't comprehend it. But yeah, there will be counter-protesters. So a lot of really important reporting coming up. So
Thank you, Das Bos Fleisch, 21 euros. Appreciate it. And I just want to make a point. Boxor77, he says, I love the Moses stick. So it's staying. And I also want to just add, before we wrap, this is personal to me because if you don't know behind the scenes, I fucking love Applebee's desserts. I love Applebee's desserts. You'll remind me, there was a caramel something with ice cream that's the apple chimney that is absolutely delicious. I'm sure it's pre-packaged and not obviously not healthy, frozen, but I loved it. If I saw Applebee's on the road, I would stop. No more. No more. I'll have to go to Chili's. I'll have to go to Chili's or TGI Fridays or some other dump. So I am walking the walk, and I'm cutting off Applebee's from my dessert menu. So thank you guys for taking the time. We will be live again around 5 o'clock Eastern. We got to go charge up everything. Please, statuscoup.com/eviction tour, statuscoup.com/eviction tour. And as Jen mentioned, go sign up to our Substack, statuscoup.substack.com. Just published a piece this morning, an exclusive piece. We got audio of a West Virginia State Democratic Party meeting from last year where, guess what? The chairwoman, who is a very close ally of Joe Manchin, her idea of diversity is adding 3 black women to the executive committee and giving them no voting power. So we have audio of that and the story. You could sign up there for free at statuscoup.substack.com. There is a paid option too. Some stories will be just for paid members. We're going to add some other perks for paid members. Trying to diversify not from just being on YouTube, create other streams to fund this. So Substack is a way. But if you can't pay as a member to Substack, you can sign up for free. Nothing's stopping you. statuscoup.substack.com. We'll be live again probably in a little over an hour. I'm going to get it. Please sign up for our text list. How do you do that?
statuscoup.com/text. I'm actually really liking this new text system we have. We just switched. We lost our short code, which means that shorter number that you used to be able to sign up with. But now you can simply go to statuscoup.com/text. It's easy. It's great. You'll be notified. What could be better?
And don't want to forget our friends on Rockfin. We got a $2 tip from Plum. And Terry, $10 tip. Thank you, our Rockfin friends. We're live on Rockfin, too. So we'll be live again soon, getting out of the sun before my wife yells at me.